Hello, welcome. This is Jennifer. I am so glad you're here. So I've kind of turned a corner with my shoulder. It's going a lot better now. Physical therapy is tough, but definitely helping. So I'm getting back into doing things like stamping and ink blending and stenciling and such. So I'm taking it easy still, but I have a few ideas to share with you today. This video is all about some simple things you can do to step up your backgrounds. I will be using stencils, stamps, dies, foil, and embossing folders. So lots of different ideas here. Hopefully something will work for you. Now let's get started with this card here. For this, we're going to use a background die, but use it to foil. This is a simple technique that gives simple yet stunning results. And because background dies have a higher price point, we want to come up with many ways to use them. So I will be using this new Simon Says Stamp Pincushion background die. Now this cuts an outline that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. It also does those pierced little lines and those small little holes. This is great for a layered background. You'll see me use it in future videos, but today I'm using it to foil. Yes, you can foil with dies, any dies really, not just hot foil plates. Now I have my Spellbinders glimmer machine set up over on the left, and I am taping my die down onto some cardstock, just creating a hinge up there. I find that's the easiest way to foil. I'm using a subtle foil today. It's the Spellbinders Gold Matte, and I'm putting that onto my paper so that the pretty side of the foil touches the pretty side of that die. I will then flip that over and put it onto my warmed up glitter machine. I've allowed this to warm up. The little light says that it's ready. And I'll put the 2 plates on top of it that come with the machine. I'll press the timer button and allow that to go, and I give it a few extra seconds. I give it about a minute on there. Once the light's out and I've given it some extra time, I will take all of those plates out, including the platform, and run it through my Spellbinders Platinum die cut machine. Now, if you have a different die cut machine, you may need a different foil machine. Just check with your manufacturer. They all work in similar ways. The glimmer machine applies the heat, the die cut machine applies the pressure, and look at that beautiful foil transfer. I like that this is simple and subtle, and the reason it's subtle is for 2 reasons. First, when you are foiling with a die, it's just the thin cut line of the die where the foil transfers, so it's very thin lined. Second, I chose the matte gold foil, which is more subtle than some of the others. If you want a lot of sparkle, I recommend the Aura, which is gold iridescent. But I really like that this adds a little bit of interest, kind of steps up this background a bit. I didn't want something too distracting because I'm going to put a lot of die cutting on it. So this is a great, simple, stepped up background. So I trimmed that down to be 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And then I'm cutting that in half at 2 3/4 of an inch because this will be a gatefold card. You'll see in a moment. I will be using the new Simon Says Stamp Branching Corner Holly die. This die cuts 2 holly corner pieces along with some layering elements. I really like dies like this and that they can be used in many ways. Today I will use them to create kind of a frame on our card. So I have cut 4 of the holly corner leaf die cuts, and I'm gluing them in the 4 corners of our background. Now remember, I've already cut my background in half. That's just because I wanted to make sure that I didn't glue anything too much overlapping that inside edge, because I wanted my gatefold card to open and close freely. Now you can glue whatever you want to on these 2 pieces that will form our background. This is actually a great go-to card design. If you're just trying to think of something to do with some products you have, try a gatefold card like this. You'll see how it comes together here in a moment. It's a good one to write down and use as future reference. So I will continue to glue these elements on those 2 halves of our background. And now we can create the gatefold note card itself that will add these 2. You'll need a scoreboard for this. I really do recommend as a card maker to have a nice scoreboard to really make sure you create nice note cards. And I'm using the Altenew scoreboard. I have a piece of cardstock that is 4 1/4 inches tall by 11 inches wide. And I'm scoring at 2 3/4 of an inch from one end. You can see 2 3/4 of an inch. Then I'll rotate that and do 2 3/4 of an inch from the other end. Now I will take these ends and fold the opposite direction and fold those so that the flaps meet together in the middle. So those 2 halves there, those 2 flaps will meet together in the middle, creating our simple gatefold card. And now we can glue these other pieces that we created onto those flaps. I really feel like a gatefold card is a nice change of pace over just a side or top folding note card, and it's something fun and unexpected. And you may notice here that I did add some layered die cuts to our holly corner leaf die cuts. I'll talk about those in a moment, but first I wanted to show you the sentiment I'm using. It's from the new Simon Says Stamp Seasons Tweeting stamp set. This is an adorable set, but I really like those large sentiments. I'll use the Merry Christmas, and the smaller sentiments in there that I'll be using on the inside of this card and the inside of a card later in this video. So off screen, I gold heat embossed Merry Christmas on the same color cardstock I used for my card. I then used the coordinating die to cut it out. I'm putting glue only on the back left side of the die cut so that I can glue it onto the left-hand flap of our gatefold card. That way I'm not gluing my card shut, and the sentiment will be centered on our card but will allow the card to open up easily. So really, you can glue anything across that center cut line. Just make sure you only glue it on one of the flaps so that you can still open it. Okay, so let's look at the completed card. Now, I did add additional die cuts to this because that die set, the holly corner leaf die set, has some layering elements. And I did some from another shade of green cardstock and some from a glitter cardstock for a bit of sparkle. Now here's a close-up look at that subtle foil that we did in the background. I like that it adds a little bit of interest but isn't too distracting with everything else going on in the card. So using your background dies to foil is one simple way to step up a background. Oh, and by the way, I did cut a mini note card to put on the inside and stamped a sentiment there so that the personal message inside of that is hidden when this card is on display. And that mini card in there is 3.5 inches by 5 inches. Okay, let's move on to our next card, which is another gatefold card design. So we're going to do the same thing, but use a different simple background technique. This time, I'm using an embossing folder and adding a bit of shine to it. The embossing folder I'm using is a 3D embossing folder from Simon Says Stamp called Filament Snowflakes. I have a piece of craft cardstock and I'm lightly misting both sides with a bit of water to get a better impression. I'll put the cardstock in my 3D embossing folder and then I can run it through my die cut machine. Now every die cut machine is a little bit different. You'll have to follow the manufacturer's instructions or just test it out. For the Spellbinders Platinum machine, I use the main platform, a folded piece of cardstock, and then the B plate on top of the embossing folder. And I find that works really well. Now this is a little wet because we misted it, so I'll just heat set it so it's dry and look at this beautiful detail. Now the cool thing about this particular embossing folder is not the deep impression, but the detailed impression. It is just gorgeous, and I will be using this again in future videos because I love that detail. You could do this technique that we're doing with any embossing folder though, keep that in mind. You could leave the simple background as is, but there is a simple way to step it up, and that is to add a little bit of metallic ink over the raised area. This will give it some shine. So I have my Misty stamping tool, and inside of it is my waffle flower grip mat, which will hold my cardstock in place as I add ink on top. Now there are many ways you could add ink on top, but my favorite is to use a brayer. I'm using Honeybee Metallic Gold Pigment ink and a Tim Holtz brayer. I'm picking up the ink on my brayer. Look at that beautiful gold shine. I will then apply the ink over our background, but I'm going to be very gentle because I only want the ink to go on the raised areas. So that will make the pattern stand out even more, and it'll give it gold shine. Now, this is something you could do with any ink. If you just want it to stand out a bit more, you could do this with like a light brown ink, whatever color cardstock you use, just a slightly darker ink color. But I like doing it with a metallic ink because you get that shine. I do recommend being very gentle and just repeating it several times to make sure you have good coverage over the raised areas only. And then because this is a pigment ink, you'll want to heat set it so that it doesn't smear. Once again, I'll cut this background in half at 2 3/4 inches. Now it's time for the die cuts that I'm going to add to this. I'm using the new Simon Says Stamp Greenery swag. Again, this is my style of die set, but you could use whatever you prefer. It has this beautiful leaf piece and then all these little smaller dies that you can decorate it with. So I'm going to do some fun layering here. Now I created 2 of the leaf die cuts, and I'm gluing them along the inside cut line so they'll meet together in the middle. Now this is something I'm going to kind of turn into a holiday card, but you definitely could use this die set for a non-holiday card too. And if die cuts like this aren't your thing, you could definitely do stamped images. You could even cut a stamp image in half or have it glued to only one of the flaps. All right, now let's create our gatefold card base. This time I'm going to do it a little bit different because I had smaller pieces of cardstock. You could definitely do the method I showed you before, but in this case, just a different way to do it, you cut 2 pieces at 4 1/4 inches tall and 8 1/4 inches wide, and you score both of them once at 2 3/4 of an inch. Now again, I did this because I had smaller pieces of cardstock, and also this cardstock was a little lighter weight, and this will double up the background and make it a bit stronger. But you definitely could do the method I showed you earlier. So now I have 2 pieces that are the same. On the back of one of them, I'll put some strong adhesive and then slide that into the other. And once again, those 2 flaps will meet together in the middle. So we'll have a gatefold card. This is just another way to do a gatefold card. It gives the same overall size in the end as what I showed you before, just another option. Now we can glue those 2 pieces right there onto the 2 flaps. By the way, if you're interested in more design ideas for gatefold cards, I will put a link to another video up here in the top right and in my description below that you can check out. For a sentiment on this one, I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Monoline Merry Christmas die set. This has a beautiful detailed Merry Christmas and a shadow die. Such a classic look. All right, so now I have created that sentiment from white cardstock and gold cardstock. I'm putting foam squares only on the back left of that die cut and adhering it right at the center. So it's only going to be adhered to that left-hand flap. That way the gatefold will open up nicely. I added a few more die cuts and a mini note card to the inside. Again, that mini note card is 5 inches wide by 3 1/2 inches tall, and I stamped a sentiment on the front of it from that Seasons Tweetings stamp set that I showed you earlier. I also added a few additional die cuts from the same die set, and I added some gold pearls. But what really is striking, I think, about this card is that background. It is hard to see in the video. I wish it would pick up, but all of that raised detail on the background has some gold shine to it. Now, metallic ink pads are kind of a muted gold. If you wanted even more shine, you could sprinkle on or brush on some pigment powder, some gold pigment powder from Manger, and that would give you even more shine. I'll show you that technique in my next video that's coming out tomorrow. So this is one simple way to step up a simple background, and that is by applying a bit of gold metallic ink over an embossing folder backdrop. Okay, my next idea is to combine your stamps and stencils to step up a simple background. Now the stencil that I'm using today is new from Simon Says Stamp. It's called the Oh Holy Night stencil set. There are 2 stencils that you could use together or separately. I'll be using both today. But first I want to add some dark color to the outside edge of my cardstock. I have like a bluish purple color cardstock here, and I'm applying some blue ink around the outside edge. This is Cadet Color Blue from Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated Ink Line. You could use absolutely any inks that you would want to here. I'm using a large Altenew blending brush because that is the fastest way to put ink down and makes it easier for blending. Now after putting that down, I decided I wanted to go a little darker, so I'm adding some royal ink on top of that. And then on the outside edges, I'm using a purple blue color. This is Iris, but keep in mind you definitely could use one ink color. I just like to layer them on. All right, now it's time to do the stenciling. So I'm taking the first stencil and lining it up. It has little marks on the stencil, so it's easy to line up on an A2 card panel. I'm taking my Hero Arts Unicorn White pigment ink pad and pressing it onto my glass work surface. I am then using a Tim Holtz mini ink blending tool to pick up that ink and dab over the stencil. The reason I pressed my ink onto the glass work surface is I didn't want to accidentally transfer any blue ink onto my ink pad. The reason I am dabbing this on with a foam applicator is I find that gives the most intense white. I could have even gone more intense with the white by continuing to add more ink, but I didn't want it to be too bright and distracting from what I'll add on top. Now it's time for the second stencil, and over this one I'm using a silver metallic ink from Honeybee. And I have a small blending brush that I've designated just for this ink pad. I am dabbing this ink over the openings instead of going in circles, because again that will put more of this pigment ink down. And wait till you see how intense and opaque that silver ink is. It's so beautiful over this stencil. So now we have some white inking and some silver pigment inking over our dark blue background. Now I could leave this background as is, but one simple way to step up a stenciled background is to add some stamping on top also. I usually like to use a text background stamp or a dot or a stripe, something basic. I've placed a sticky mat inside of my Misty stamping tool along with a background stamp from Simon Says Stamp called Christmas Words. I'm lining up my background right there in the center of the background stamp. I will then close my Misty upside down, and that sticky mat will grab my cardstock and hold it in position so that I can stamp straight onto it. Now when I ink up my stamp, I am using Iris ink, which is a dark color. It's the darkest color I used on the edge. I'm inking up the whole stamp, but then I'll use a dry cloth to wipe away some of the ink in the center. I wanted the center to be a little bit softer than the rest of the background because that's where our manger or focal point will be. Now, sorry my head gets in the way. I'm using my elbow to really press that down because my right arm isn't happy with me. And I'm going to repeat that process again, just to make that background darker. I did switch to a galaxy color, which is even darker, so that it would show up even more. I wanted this to be visible, but not too distracting. And notice that center is very bright. It doesn't have really any stamping there, very little ink. The only thing that's there is the stenciling. Now, at this point, I changed my mind. I wanted the stamping to be there at the center, so I stamped it one time without wiping the ink away at the center, and look what we have. The stamping's darker around the outside. There's a little bit there in the center, but that stamping just adds a little more interest to that stenciled background. Now, because I use pigment ink, the white and the silver, I need to heat set that so I don't smear it. Also, I'm going to do some heat embossing, so I really need it to be dry. Now the stamp set that I used for the sentiment is the new Simon Says Stamp Hark the Herald Angels Sing, and the dies I'll be using are the Simon Says Stamp Manger die set that you see on the right. After checking to make sure that my ink is dry, especially towards the bottom there, I will stamp my sentiment with Versamark ink. I first use my anti-static powder tool. I'll stamp the sentiment, and I like to stamp it 2 or 3 times just to make sure I get a lot of that clear sticky ink down. I will then add white embossing powder and heat set it, and this will give me a bright white sentiment against our dark inked background. So I love that all of this layering is going on that background. It's a simple way to step it up. Now I have die cut the manger and the star from white cardstock. I actually die cut it twice and glued it together so it has a bit of dimension, and I'll place that right above our little sentiment. I finished off the card by adding 1 gemstone at the center of the star. Now that blue panel was trimmed down and added to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. And here you can get a closer look at the layering we did on the background. I inked only the edges so that we kind of had a glow there at the center for our manger. I then did the stenciling, and to step it up in a simple way, I just stamped a background stamp on top of it. I think this is a fun way to get kind of a clean mixed media look and use your supplies creatively. So we're using stencils and stamps together to create a different look. All right, let's do one more card example. Then I have some peeks from my next video that'll come out soon. On this card, we're stepping up a very simple card design by using an embossing folder over the entire background. This is something that is great to do with cardstock scraps. I'm starting by cutting some very thin paper to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I'm using graph paper. I just like to have that on hand because it helps me keep things straight, but you could use copy or printer paper, something thin. It could even be junk mail that you use for this. Then you need a piece of cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, the same size as that thin paper. And I'm cutting this at an angle. I didn't measure it, I'm just eyeballing it. I will cover my thin paper, my graph paper here, with adhesive. You could use whatever adhesive you want. You could even use a big piece of double-sided adhesive. I just grabbed this tape runner. It was easy to do. I will start by putting this big angled piece up at the top, And then below that, I will place some cardstock strips. So these can be scraps, a great way to use scraps. I will then put adhesive below that, make sure there's enough there still, and place the rest of our white piece. I'll cut off the extras of those strips and then trim my background down to be 5.5 inches tall. Now we have this fun, smooth inlaid background that we could leave as is, but a fun way to step this up is to use an embossing folder on the whole background. So I'm going to mist this lightly with some water, and I have the new Simon Says Stamp Burst Snowflake 3D embossing folder. I love this. It actually has dies to cut out the different shapes, but I'm not using those today. I'll put my background into here and run it through my die cut machine. Because there's really no layering to this, just that it was glued to that super thin paper, this will still emboss beautifully. And we have this continuous embossed pattern over the whole background, including those strips that we added. I really like that as opposed to just gluing the strips on top of an embossing foldered background. Now to decorate this, I use the Simon Says Stamp Harmony Snowflakes dies. This is an older one that I use quite often. And I use the new Simon Says Stamp All the Joy die set. I really like this. I like that it's different and I like the style of it. I actually used it also on an upcoming project. But here I cut the All the Joy from black glossy cardstock and put it on a white die cut. Then I added the snowflakes that I cut from a silver iridescent cardstock, and I added a gemstone at the center. So we could have kept this card very simple by doing a white background with an embossing folder and then put some cardstock strips on top of it. But by using the strips in the embossing folder too, you have that continuous embossed pattern over the entire card, which is just a simple way to step it up. This is a go-to card design also. You could put any element that you want there instead of that sentiment, and you can use whatever supplies that you may have. Now, when filming this video, I actually had 2 more ideas that I thought I'd save for my next video, but I'll give you a peek here. In this video, I will be showing you how to create really shiny backgrounds using an embossing folder. It's another simple way to step up your background and get great results. So stay tuned for that. That video will come out tomorrow. In the meantime, I will link below to the supplies I used on these sneak peek cards and all the cards I showed in this video, all in my YouTube description. I will link here at the end to a couple other related videos in hopes that you're inspired to try some of these techniques of simple ways to step up a simple background. I thank you for spending this time with me. If you haven't done so, please subscribe to my channel. That way you'll be notified when there's a new video or whenever I go live. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I'll be back soon.